Welcome to day 2. So this is the original disability pride flag. Okay. So, trigger warning for mentions of abuse. Anyway, charcoal gray is money for ableist violence, abuse victims, people who ended themselves, and everyone who died due to the disability. The red stripe is physical disabilities. The gold stripe is for neurodiversity. The blue stripe is for emotional and psychiatric disabilities. The green stripe is for sensory disabilities. And the white stripe is for undiagnosed and invisible disabilities. So first we're going to start off with violence against disabled people. Okay, on September 4th, 2020, Lyndon Cameron, an unarmed 13-year-old autistic boy with a sensory processing disorder, was shot and seriously injured by Matthew Forilas, a police officer in Salt Lake City, Utah. Lyndon was shot 6 times by Forilas after Lyndon ran from his home during a meltdown. In 2022, the family and the city agreed to settle their civil case for $3 million. Darlene K. Vandergeisen, died February 1st, 2006, was a deaf American woman murdered in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Initially reported missing, her dismembered remains were later recovered in rural Rock County, Minnesota, and in the Sioux Falls landfill. Her cause of death could not be officially determined, but was ruled to either have been due to suffocation or blunt force trauma. Okay, next is abuse victims. I'm on Disability Memorial. Okay. A newborn less than 6 days old. Burned alive following Yanomami tradition. Disability. A malformation in his leg. Alexandra Kurdyukova. There's also Maxim and Mikhail or Misha. Cause of death, warfarin poisoning. Disability, atypical hemolytic uremic syndrome. Their mother, when arrested, claimed she had tried to cure her children, but that was too difficult, so she wanted to kill them and start a new family with healthy children. John Vogel's 6. Cause of death, smothered. Disability, cerebral palsy. Corey Watts. Cause of death, gunshot. Disability, head injury from motorcycle accident. John Muir. Cause of death, stabbed. Disability, partial paralysis from polio. He was a retired IBM executive. Chucky Sweeten. Cause of death, gunshot. Intellectual disability. Dorothy Sweeten, mother, charged with murder, died before trial. Matthew Rosio. Cause of death, starvation. Disability, cerebral palsy. He was 11. Oops, I screwed up. I'm so sorry, I screwed up. Let me go back to 1980 to 1985 deaths. Louise Brown, 14 days. Cause of death, homicide. Disability, Down syndrome. Her father was convicted of manslaughter, sentenced to 5 years, served less than 2. Her uncle served 9 months in jail for helping dispose of Louise's body. Katanga Jackson. Age at death, 3. Cause of death, untreated epilepsy. Katanga had seizures, which the pastor took to mean that she had the devil in her. Katanga's family says she starved and beat Katanga and refused to give her her epilepsy medication. Baby Doe, 6 days old. Cause of death, starvation and pneumonia. They had Down syndrome. Scott Sander and Michelle Sander. Michelle was 14 and Scott was 11. Cause of death, gunshot. Disability, Muffin syndrome. James Lloyd, 4 years old, died from gunshot, had intellectual disability. Caroline Lloyd, his mother, was convicted of murder. Okay, now going back to 1986 to 1990. Okay, so Chucky Sweeten was 39. Matthew Rosio was 11. Okay, and Jeanetta Clayton, 2 years old. Cause of death, starvation. Disability, microcephaly. Samuel Linez, 16 months. Cause of death, hypoxia and ventilator disconnected. Disability, PVS due to hypoxic brain damage. Gail Terrell, 32 years old, died from gunshot, had epilepsy and cerebral palsy. Her mother offered to plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter and was ordered to serve 5 years of a 20-year sentence. Eric Bernstein, 2, died from gunshot, hypoxic brain injury at birth causing cerebral palsy. Frederick Wattier, 3 years old. Cause of death, neuroleptic overdose. He had cerebral palsy and epilepsy. Aaron Norman, 10 years old. Cause of death, diabetes. Leo Van Haverbeek, or never mind. Dominic Dial, 13, died from head injury, disability, child abuse survivor, and emotionally disturbed. Andrew liked to read Western novels. 1991 to 1995. Lucas Ciambrone, His birth name was Pedro Garcia, and he was 7. Cause of death: head injury, disability, reactive attachment disorder. Lucas liked Star Wars. That's kind of funny because the creator of Star Wars, his name was also Lucas. Anyway, Danielle Tucker, born Danielle O'Donnell. Age at death: 3. Cause of death: head injury. Disability: Down syndrome, fetal alcohol syndrome, and spina bifida. Michael Messenger, newborn. Cause of death: withdrawal of life support. Disability: prematurity with a risk of disability. Basma Vafe, age at death: 20, was bludgeoned to death. Disability: autism. Cecil Bush, 81, cause of death: stabbed. Disability: Alzheimer's disease and blindness. Joan Vollmer, 49, cause of death: asphyxia and heart attack. Disability: schizophrenia, depression, and anxiety. Diana Robles, age at death: 44, cause of death: stabbed. Disability: mobility impaired due to polio, use crutches. Josiah Carroll, 12 years old, was smothered, had cerebral palsy. Wendy Busby and Elwin Keller. Elwin was 22 and Wendy was 20. They were stabbed to death and had intellectual disability. Carrie Day, 22 years old, died from pneumonia, had intellectual disability. Mark Dowell, 35 years old, died from drug overdose. Disability, intellectual disability. Janet Cunningham, and Dorothy. Janet had a head injury from car accident and died at 43. Dorothy had osteoporosis and died at 62. They both had traumatic injury. Dorothy, a homemaker, taught piano lessons. Jeanette loved skiing and was a former member of the National Ski Patrol. Mr. Lev. His name is unknown and his last name may be Lev. He died at 16 years old from poisoning, and he was autistic. Jenny Cazares. She was 3 months old and died from a head injury. She had Down syndrome. Diana Fenn, 4 years old, died from gunshot. Disability, bone brain damage, and visually impaired. Noah Simpson. He was 2 years old and he died from suffocation. He had cerebral palsy. 1996 to 2000. Annette Bauer, 47 years old. Cause of death, sedative and insulin poisoning. She had chronic kidney disease. Cynthia Hrisco, 47 years old, drowned, had rheumatoid arthritis and was a wheelchair user. Cynthia had a degree in nutrition and worked from her home as a nutrition counselor. She had an adopted son. Kura Okansky. So, we don't know if she is actually dead because she was last seen April 16th, 2000, and her body was never found. She went missing at 23 years old, and she has bipolar disorder and ADHD. Okay, so Kura's murder trial is proceeding even though her body was never found, but there is good evidence that she is dead. After she disappeared, her family didn't hear from her and her disability payments went uncollected. The case broke when Kura's fiancé, in prison for unrelated charges, bragged to another prisoner that he had chokeslammed Kura and buried her body. Joyce George, 86 years old, died from pneumonia secondary to malnutrition and pressure sores. She had osteoporosis, hypothyroidism, atrial fibrillation, chronic constipation, depression, and mild dementia. Philip George, her son, was found guilty of manslaughter by criminal negligence, sentenced to 2 to 3 years. Jenny Lerner, was 73 years old, died from asphyxia. She had early Alzheimer's disease. Melody Reynolds. She was 40 and she died from a gunshot. She had mobility impairment and sleep disorder. Florence Simpson. She was 81 years old and died from asphyxia. She had terminal cancer. Christopher Simpson, her son, was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 3 years. Louise Papeman. Hold on. She died at 88 years old. Her cause of death was gunshot, and she had kidney disease and depression. Walter Papeman, her husband, sentenced to 1 year. That is bullshit. Like, why sentence him to just 1 year? Anyway, Joy Martin, 69 years old. Cause of death, morphine poisoning. Had terminal cancer. After Joy was dead, her daughter wrote a book about killing her mother and was arrested. Daniel Lubner, 13 years old. Died from smoke inhalation, and he had autism. Michelle Davis' mother pled guilty to manslaughter, sentenced to 6 years. James Cummings Jr., 46 years old. Cause of death, stabbed. He had autism and a stroke. James Cummings Sr., father, sentenced to 5 years in prison. Tasha Lanham, 7 years old, died from starvation. She was born prematurely and had developmental delays. Michelle Thorpe, her mother, was charged with first-degree murder and was sentenced to death. Lenka Ulikova, she was 14 years old and was stabbed to death. She had brain damage from meningitis. Otto Orlik, her father, was convicted of murder and sentenced to life. Thank God. Jim Helm, 27 years old. Cause of death unspecified. Homicide. He had Down syndrome and autism. Corey Moore, 29. Died from pulmonary thromboembolism. Had intellectual disability and hearing loss. Casey Albury, 17 years old, was strangled. she had autism. Casey liked painting and composing music. Shut up! Sorry, guys. Dominic McCarthy, 34, died from insulin overdose. Paraplegic from motorcycle accident. Jeanette Williams, 47, cause of death stabbing. She was paraplegic. Thai Chen, 16 years old. Sorry, T Chen. Her name is T Chen, sorry. T Chen died from viral encephalitis and had cerebral palsy. T's death was put down to natural causes. However, years later, when 4 former foster children came forward to report that they had been physically and sexually abused by their foster parents, they also testified that T had died from the same neglect they had all been subjected to. Justin Blair and Sandra Blair. Sandra was 36 and had an injury from a car accident. Justin was 8 and had cerebral palsy and blindness. Cause of death, bludgeoned with hammer. Robert Blair, Justin's father and Sandra's husband, was convicted of murder and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. Katie Baker, 10 years old, died from starvation, had Rett syndrome. Cheryl Baker, her mother, was never charged. Robin Appleby, 30 years old, died from starvation, had intellectual disability and epilepsy. Christina Corrigan, 13 years old, died from heart failure. She had mobility impairment due to obesity, possible Prader-Willi syndrome. Maureen Corrigan, her mother, was convicted of misdemeanor child abuse, sentenced to 3 years probation. If you don't know what Prader-Willi syndrome is, basically it's a genetic disorder that causes obesity, intellectual disability, and shortness in height. It's usually caused by deletion of a part of chromosome 15 passed down by the father. This ends part 1.